Okay, hope you guys can see that. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody or somebody come off mute and tell me that you guys can see that fine?
We can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so good morning, guys. This class shouldn't be quite as long. Hey, Linda, good to see you. Good morning. Um, okay, so this is one of my secrets. So I'm revealing kind of a secret that I don't really talk about too often. So, but again, the whole point of this is to share so you guys succeed and grow into this space. Um, so basically what we're going to talk about today is a make me move strategy. And it's has two purposes really. Um, One is you're going to gain or potentially gain, if you do it well, off-market properties, right? So off-market listings, especially in the luxury space. Um, but then two, you're gonna increase your sphere and you're gonna increase the potential that you're gonna eventually have an on-market listing, so a traditional listing. Um, so this is there's no downside to this at all, right? And this is all, for the most part. I mean, you can put money into developing these leads, and we'll talk about different ways to do that. But this is hustle cash, right? It's the more you hustle, the better the payoff. So, you guys know me, I'm a big fan of free. So if you can get this for free, then that's great. So that's the intent behind the class. And then if this is high level. So if you guys want to explore this more in depth, just schedule a coaching call with me on my Calendly. If you guys don't have that link, it's in our portal. So just find that portal, grab it, and schedule time, and I'll go through this with you in detail. So, okay, so that's the intent. Let's see. All right. So just so you guys know, I use Gamma for my presentations. They use AI quite often or all the time, really, for the images. So if something looks kind of funky, I'm going to blame that on the AI. Okay, so why off market? And again, this is geared towards luxury clients, right? Now, this doesn't have to be. This same strategy works for everybody, but they'll have different drivers, right? A big part of the luxury market is learning their drivers, what their decision making, what's important to them, what's not important to them, and then positioning yourself to attract them. So this is really geared towards that luxury avatar. But if you're just trying to do this for normal homes, all this will apply, but you're just going to have a different way of attracting them, right? Because different things matter to different people at different price points. So that said, this is luxury, right? So why is that important? Well, rich people love their privacy and discretion, right? So they might choose to do something off market simply because they don't want their house on the MLS and they don't want the public seeing what kind of artwork they have or what their gates like, their security, all that stuff. If you're a good listing agent, you put all that stuff in the listing description, right? Or at least in the realtor remarks, right? Down to sometimes, when the security system's armed and stuff like that, or if somebody's, hey, the client's not, they're gone for the week, and that stuff is readily accessible to most consumers. So rich people are smart for the most part. They don't want that on out in the World Wide Web a lot of times. So that's one reason they may choose to do an off-market listing. Um, a lot of times as well, we're dealing with properties that are second homes, third homes, fourth homes, vacation homes, not necessarily the primary residence, right? If you're in that kind of $5 to $10 million price range, it may not be their primary home, right? Or even if it is, what I found is that wealthy clients are less attached to physical things, right? In general, right? So the more money you have, the less you care about physical attachment to those things. And that includes properties. So there's less of an emotional attachment to a property. So a lot of times, they may not think they want to sell the house, but they're open, they're probably a business person. So they're open to an offer. If somebody makes them an offer that makes sense for them financially, then they'll take it and they don't have a connection to the house. Right. So that's another reason why this kind of works especially well with luxury clients. And then the last one is the market stigma, right? So especially now in this market, luxury properties are sitting for a longer time. Uh, I've got a few of these properties listed right now, and they don't get showings. It's just rare, right? The buyer pool in our market has shrunk significantly for luxury clients. Not necessarily that way across the country, but generally right now, rich people are sitting on their money because of all the, whatever, the uncertainty. Um, and that is especially true in our local market here in Sarasota, just because we had such huge growth over the last 5 years. We were literally the top county in the top state for growth. So obviously, when that growth, when things change, we're going to have the most dramatic impact because we saw the most growth. That's just how math works. But anyway, so a lot of people it's going to sit on the market. So they don't want it to sit on the market for 6 months or a year, right? So they'd rather just list it off market so they don't have that stigma of all the days accumulating. Um, or maybe they know that they want to sell it next year, but they're willing to put it out there this year to start getting offers, but they don't want to list it this year because if by the time they really want to sell it next year, it will have accumulated a year on the market. And then once you get that stigma, buyers just assume there's something wrong with the house, even though the house might be perfectly fine. There's just not a huge audience right now for that. So those are really the three main drivers, right? So why I mentioned that is, again, we're positioning, right? So everything we do in the luxury market, you're positioning your brand and your services to suit a problem, right? We're problem solvers. We don't sell homes. We're solving problems, right? Selling home is obviously the eventual product or the offshoot of it and what benefits us the most. But if I know a client really values their privacy and discretion, if I know a client isn't emotionally attached to a property, so they're willing to take, hey, if somebody offers me X, then I'm willing to sell it. And then, I don't necessarily know that I like it being in the public and being listed and having that days on market stigma. If you know those three things, then you can build. So that's your avatar, right? When we talk about avatar, that's the client. That's what's driving their decisions. If I know that, then I can position myself and my brand and my marketing and all of the things that I do to solve that problem, right? So it's very important that you do this. And if it's not a luxury client, right, then identify what the $500,000 buyer, what's driving them? Why would they want to list things off market? We're not going to get into that here. Some of them may be very similar. And whatever that is, then you got to position yourself to solve that problem, right? Okay. All right. So who are these people generally? So it's easy to just say, well, they're wealthy people that own $5 to $10 million homes, right? But that's not necessarily true. So typically, it's somebody that's busy. It's somebody that works. They may or may not be, kind of a C-level executive at their company, or maybe they're just a small business owner or a large business owner. But they value time, right? Time is their currency, right? It's not necessarily how much things cost or what a service costs. How does that service, it's really how does that service improve my time? And really, if you get to the true need, it's how does whatever I buy or whatever service I pay for allow me to spend more time with my family, my doing stuff that I enjoy, my passion, blah, 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 right? So that's where they spend money, right? So busy executives fit that role perfectly. And that's one of the buyer profiles usually. Absentee owners, again, it's that same person that owns one, two, three, four homes. Maybe they own a house, if we're talking about the local market here in Sarasota, they own it and they're there for 1 or 2 weeks a year. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm going to offer you $10 million for your house, right? In your mind, you're like, oh, well, shit, I bought it for 5 million, 6 years ago. I'm there for a week. Why wouldn't I? Right. So absentee owners is another good one. And then just patient sellers, right? So somebody that is willing to sell, and this is the most difficult one, right? And they're willing to sell, but they don't necessarily want to give up their home. and they're just waiting for kind of the perfect buyer to come by and the premium price, right? Or maybe they have a special property, and they have a value in their mind, and they would sell it if somebody came in at the right price, but it's got to be the right price, right? So really the first two is what you'll see the most often, is just busy people that own businesses and work and just have limited time, or just people that own several homes and maybe they just don't use this one very often. Okay, so what's the pitch, right? So basically, and there's 20 different ways you can do this, and we'll verbally talk some of this, but so none of this is pushy, right? This is a very uh, easy exchange. Basically, what the move is you're going to communicate to the client. We'll talk about how you get to reach the client in a second, but it's basically, hey, you've got this lovely home. If I was able to come in here and I found a buyer that was willing to make you an unbelievable offer, would you be willing to sell? Right? Make me move. So years ago, Zillow used to have a feature that was called Make Me Move, actually. And owners could list their home and put a theoretical price on there, right? 10 million bucks. And if somebody was willing to pay that, then they would say, okay, let's have a discussion about it, right? It's basically the same thing, except this isn't from the owner. There's an agent or broker in the middle of it. Um, but that's the pitch, right? At the heart of it, it is, if I found the right buyer and they gave you the right number for your property, would you consider selling the property, right? So how do you do that at the end of the day? Um, well, there's a few ways. So I'll just kind of talk through some scenarios. The properties, right? We know which properties are over kind of, whatever the value is. Let's say 3 million and above. All right. So those are going to be typically in our market, they're waterfront properties, our big homes, or maybe you're out in, one of the suburbs here with a big house, right? Big yard, big house. So a few ways to do that would be door knocking. This is one area where actually door knocking has a very high percentage, because it's not an indirect, hey, do you want to sell your house, right? Which has a very low conversion percentage, still effective for being free. But this one, you're not asking to sell the house, right? You're saying, hey, I'm a luxury agent, right? Obviously, introduce yourself. You'll go through, I'm not going to go through the script specifically. But the message is, I don't have a buyer for you now, but if I had a buyer and they're willing to offer you, a sum of money that was beneficial for you, would you consider selling your home, right? On luxury clients, again, there's a higher chance that they're willing to say yes to that. So door knocking is one of them. Okay. Mailings. If you do mailings, same thing. Your whole message is that message. It's, would you be willing to sell your home for an amazing price, right? Whatever your script is there. But basically, you're not saying what the price is, right? But the hook is you're making it so it's a price that they can't say no to, basically, right? And send out mailings, right? And attach a QR code, or obviously your information's on there. And you treat this just like a farm, right? Now, your farm is not limited. Well, it can be limited to one geographic area, but instead you're farming an avatar, right? A buyer profile instead of a geographic location, right? So your farm might be 300 doors that are worth $3 to $10 million, right? So you're going to send just like you would do to your farm, right? You're going to continually touch them. You may have success on one piece of mailing, but usually you don't, right? So if you choose direct mail-in, for instance, you've got to have repetitive, right? It's got to be a longer term and it's got to be repetitive. So you get in front of that client, preferably on a weekly, if not a bi-weekly basis. They're getting something. They're getting a newsletter. They're getting a postcard, some sort of mailing, right? And you guys know me, the mailing has to be different, right? So you really focus a lot on that pitch. And the message, the make me move message is very powerful, right? It's basically, hey, if I can get you a shit ton of money for your house, would you be willing to listen? Right. It's not pushy. It's a very soft kind of sell. Um, and what it does, even if they don't respond to that, if you're farming, you're sending direct mail, they get two or three of these, they'll probably look at it because that's a short message, right? And you're going to do the piece of mailing so that it is short and sweet and has a bold impact. They may not respond to that. They may not call you off of that piece of mailing. But when you door knock or when you have another way of approaching them and reaching them, and you can mine. So for all these things, right, you have the address or you have the LLC, you can mine their emails, you can mine their phone numbers. There's services that do that relatively easy that you have to subscribe to. Um, so you'll have all their information. Um, so if they don't respond to the direct mailing, maybe they will respond to a text message or the door knock or the email campaign, right? So the message here is you treat this just like any other farm. And I'm not going to specifically get into farming. Again, that's kind of for a private call. But instead of a geographic area, you're farming that client, that avatar. Um, Okay, so this is the message. I have some bullet points on here, very friendly, right? None of this is overly pushy. You're not doing, if you know like wholesalers that do, they're doing fix and flips, they send out 10,000 pieces of mail and it's clinical, right? Do you want to sell your house? I'm willing to buy it. Give me a call sort of thing. It's not that. That's pushy, right? It's effective for that client, but for this client, that's not how it has to be. It has to be very easy. It has to be bold, right? Eye-catching, but it's not a hard sell, right? And then, in that, maybe not on a piece of mailing, but in maybe if you're doing emails to these clients, in there you want to represent some of those drivers that we talked about, right? So privacy, stigma of days on market, that sort of message is the theme of your approach to this. Um, Emphasize control, right? Wealthy people love to be in control or feel like they're in control, right? So if it's off market, they are literally in control of when it's, what goes out, not necessarily what goes out, but to a certain extent, right? What the messaging is that goes out, at least. The timeline, the price, they're not worried about days on market, right? And then what you're doing, the whole intent of this is you're really trying to position yourself as more of a concierge. I have consultant listed on there in the BAS, or advisor and consultant. Um, you're not a salesperson, right? You're basically, hey, I'm a luxury agent. I um, I always have wealthy clients that are looking for properties. If I find a client for you, would you be willing to sell your home? Right. But you're positioning yourself as an advisor and not a salesperson. So you're solving their problems. Right. And this will come over time. Once you get an inquiry or somebody that wants to meet with you, or says, yeah, what's the number? Right. And you guys agree to a number. And I'll tell you, when you do off market, it's less about the number, right? So they may say, let's say this is a $5 million home, and they say, yeah, I want 8 million for it. That's okay, right? In the MLS world, Linda, you are when you hear somebody to say this, they want twice as what it's worth. You're like, okay, bye. Let the next agent, But when it's off market, it's less important, right? Because again, yes, you're trying to sell the home, right? And when things are not listed, you know, uh, once you get to 5 million, the true value of the property and certainly beyond 10 million, it becomes more subjective, right? Just does. Yeah, of course, there's a price per square foot you can do comparisons on, but when you get into that caliber of home, there's things that are invaluable, or it's hard to place value, if the house has an indoor shooting range or two master bedrooms or whatever, a golf view, whatever it is. So it's less about the price, right? Agree to the price. Get them into your ecosystem, right? Your sphere as a potential client. Um, and we'll talk about what the advantages of that is, right? So this is a long game relationship, right? So yes, if you have an off-market listing, you can try to sell that. And if you're in this, game long enough, you will actually have buyers that are looking for properties, and they've already looked on Zillow. So if you can position them in front of things that are not available to the public, that is like gold, right? At this level, when you go to an event, they don't want to sit in they want to sit first row. They want that like exclusive, like behind closed doors or VIP section sort of feel. And when you're presenting off-market properties that no one else knows about to a client, for one, you are like sealing their relationship with that client, right? But obviously, you're building a relationship with this off-market listing. Um, a lot of these over time, again, the end goal, if you don't sell it off market, is to develop this into a traditional listing, right? So if you're working with this person, maybe you're bringing or you're asking questions. Again, a lot of this is you need to stay in constant contact and you're developing that relationship. There's a high probability that that will eventually translate into an actual MLS listing, right? And we can talk that translation game over time in a private call, because there's kind of steps that get you there. It's not an immediate thing. And certainly if you get this off market, you would never take the approach of like 2 weeks later, you're trying to convert that into an on market thing, right? This is a long game, right? So you open the door, you start building this relationship, you're staying top of mind, right? Once they say yes, or at least once they respond to you and you're starting to have this exchange of information, I count that as a win, right? Because now they're in your sphere, right? Now you're going to learn like, yeah, I'm here for 2 weeks out of the year. I really, when we bought this place, we were looked at condos and we were like all that stuff you're listening to. So if a new really cool condo comes on, you're like, hey, I know you guys looked at condos when you first bought this house 5 years ago. This really awesome condo just came on the market. You guys want to go take a look at it the next time you're in town? That's the sort of indirect dialogue. That's a little more direct actually, but that's the kind of indirect dialogue you're having with these clients, right? And then certainly if you have a buyer that's interested, you're saying, hey, John, we met last week. You said you would consider, having an off-market listing. I know what your price is. I have a client that might be interested. Is there a chance I could show the house? Or maybe you ask some questions, right? How old is the roof? When did you put in the pool? Blah, 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 right? You're constant contact, you're developing that relationship and you're staying top of mind to them so that if they do want to buy another property in the area, they're going to call you. If they do say, yeah, you know what? I got home, I talked to my husband, and he said, yeah, why don't we just go ahead and sell this thing, right? Why don't you guys come over and that's how this goes over time, right? It's not going to happen immediately. So this is a long game, right? So if you're not in a long game, don't even consider doing this, right? This is something that's going to increase your sphere and it's going to potentially develop a new client for you that's going to hopefully sell, but may buy. And then another beauty of this is they're going to, over time, you now have another point on the map, right? So you can expand from there geographically, right? So now I've got an excuse to knock on neighbors' doors. Hey, I just so you know, I've got John's house. He doesn't want to list it, so we're going to keep it off market. It's available for 12 million. This is you going to the neighbors. It's available for 12 million bucks if you wanted to come take a look at it, or maybe somebody that wants to move in. You're doing the same thing. You're starting that relationship, right? And maybe they say, well, he wants $12 million for that place. Well, come on in, take a look at our place. What could you get us for this, right? That's the relationship, right? So that's geographically farming, and you can start doing that. But also that owner, right, John, I think we said his name was John, but then I referred to him as somebody else. Sorry. You're going to slowly get introduced into their sphere, right? So that's less effective if they're only here for 1 or 2 weeks of the year and they don't have a local sphere. But you're going to slowly crack into that person's sphere and you're going to develop a relationship. So if they have family and friends that want to come down and move, or maybe they're looking for a high class rental for the season when they come down, you're building in that referral relationship as well. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So, okay. So, and I'll come back to some of that, the sphere and how that helps you. All right. Okay. So what? So we're with EXP. This will be recorded, and some people that aren't with EXP will watch this. Um, but basically, forgive me for being kind of an EXP pitch right now, but how do you use that to your advantage? So we are literally the largest brokerage. Um, we have, I think, 95,000 agents or something like that, thereabouts. So with these, and we'll talk about what off market means in the eyes of NAR and state regulations. But being the largest brokerage, you got a lot of producers, right? A lot of agents in feeder markets. Most of the buyers, at least in our market here in Sarasota, come from somewhere else, especially at this price range. If somebody's buying a $10 million home, they don't live in Sarasota. I've never seen that once, right? They live somewhere else full time. And they're either, maybe they have a property down here and they're getting bigger, getting a different location, but they're from somewhere else. They're from Chicago, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Los Angeles, and Texas right now. Those are the four big feeder markets. How do I know that? Because you can Google that, or actually you can just chat GPT that and say, where in the last 6 months of sales, where the majority of the buyers coming from. It mines all that data from deeds, right, and tells you, literally, it will tell you where they're coming from. So we have agents in those markets, right? So I can advertise an off-market property internally to the brokerage. EXP gives you, I think it's called Success. Forgive me if that's not the name of it, but basically you can advertise an off-market listing within the brokerage, and you're allowed to do that. So in that case, being with the largest brokerage gives you the most potential of agents in feeder markets. That somebody in Chicago sees it, their client is looking for an off-market property. Hey, this one looks cool, right? So you've got that ability, right? Whereas if you work for a smaller brokerage, or maybe a large brokerage in your local market, they don't have that same relationship, right? So they can't market externally to feeder markets. So it's good. Obviously, we're the biggest, but there's other big companies too, right? If you're a Coldwell Banker or Remax, those are fairly large as well. They can do, I won't say the same thing, but they have kind of same thing, different access. So internal network, yeah. So it is depending on your state. You can't really go to I work for EXP. I can't go to a Coldwell Banker agent and say, hey, I've got an off-market listing, right? NAR just doesn't let you do that, right? That's part of the clear cooperation rule. As soon as I market external of the brokerage, it has to go in MLS in 24 hours. That's state by state. Obviously, there's a few big brokerages that are fighting that right now, and if you follow the news, that's all the headlines is, Zillow's no longer going to do this, and Compass is, standing on a soapbox and talking about that. So I would advise you to follow that very closely, but it never hurts to be with a big company, right? This is where being with a big company helps you. And so let me talk about that. Well, let's get into this, I guess, but you're going to convey that, right? So when you're pitching this to your clients, or your prospects, you're going to convey, again, if you work for EXP or a big company, how that's to their advantage, right? That you can advertise this internally within the brokerage, and it's going to get a lot of push out to the feeder markets, because I can talk to agents in Chicago and Los Angeles about your property and not break any rules, right? At the end of the day, the owner's not going to care about breaking rules because it's their property, right? They don't really care. Like, if you think about it, the NAR and the MLS rules are nonsense, right? All it does is limit and restrict the seller's choices, in my opinion. I know that's not the opinion of larger EXP right now. So eventually this is all going to get hashed out, but use that to your advantage, right? I work for a huge company. We have 95,000 agents. We have whatever the number is, 4,000 agents in the Chicago area. Most of our purchases are coming from Chicago. I can market this and have lots of visibility, right? Okay, so this is kind of the stuff, and we talked some of this, right? So maintain discretion, right? There's no Zillow posts. You're not gonna. This is one that you can't do. You just need to be very careful, right? Because right now you'll get fined if you do an off-market listing or advertise an off-market listing, you'll get fined. Right. So you're not going to do that coming soon post on social media. You're truly going to have discretion with this. And then just, you need to be very careful. Obviously, don't get caught. There are obviously gray areas in this. I'm not going to discuss gray areas. But just you got to maintain discretion with this. Leverage your networks, right? So your personal database, right? There's nothing saying that you can't reach out to people. Just you need to do it discreetly, right? And check with the state that you're in and your company and what their policies are on this. These are private showings. You're not going to do open houses. It's only qualified buyers, right? Um, don't do the game where you go knock on, let's say you start developing this relationship and you say you got a potential buyer and then you're just bringing in another agent, right? Or your spouse or a friend to act as the buyer, right? Don't do that. There are agents that do that. It's terrible. Don't do that. And then use all that insider access language we talked about, right? It's not on the market yet. You're creating exclusivity, and wealthy people really kind of love that, right? So that's kind of the approach to your marketing in general, right? Okay, so how do you build this inventory, right? So we talked about the farming, sending the personalized letters. So we talked about those of you who are on the class, positioning is very important, right? But our whole before the door concept of that's when you use like high touch things ahead of your listing appointment in order to win the listing appointment. You can do the same thing here too, right? Maybe it's not mailings you do, or maybe in addition to mailings and door knocking, if you're really targeting properties, and there are ways, if you see that a property is owned by someone whose primary address is in Chicago, or let's say it's in Toronto, that it's not their primary home, right? So they're probably more willing to sell, right? Or the more you learn about the avatar's profile that makes you feel like they may want to do something like this, or let's say that it was listed prior. Let's say it was listed 2 years ago and then didn't sell. They canceled for whatever reason. Chances are that person will be willing to sell, right? They may not want to list it again, but they'd be willing to sell if somebody came back in and offered them the right price, right? So your approach isn't going to be, you're not going after luxury expireds and trying to get the listing, right? That's not what I'm saying. But maybe after time has passed, you're going after luxury expired and you're trying to get them list off market, right? It's less of a direct impact to them if they get the right price. Sure, there's no downside to me, right? But if I know somebody is well qualified, that's when I would spend money, time, resources to make more of a targeted, more of a high touch approach. So what do I mean by that, right? So part of our before the door thing is you're going to do personalized videos, right? So I would first of all do a whole video series on off markets and why they would want to consider this, right? So you've got, let's say it's 4, 5, 6 videos that are 1.5 to 3 minutes long, and you're going to explain each process, right? What does off market mean? Maybe that's one thing, right? Why it's important to them, right? About privacy and exclusivity, and the whole like stigma of days on market, right? Another video is, I work for this company. It's got 95,000 agents. I can market this internally. It's going to have access to right? And then you're gonna do that video series, right? And then for this property specifically, you're going to do a personalized video, right? So it's maybe it's like a minute and a half of you personally talking to that owner in a video form, right? This is talking head sort of video, introducing yourself and giving a quick elevator pitch on why they should do this, right? You're going to include that in your message, right? So that's going to be text to them. It's going to be email to them. But then high touch point, right? So part of that before the door thing that's in our the luck scale process is you're gonna deliver a pre-listing package, right? So do the same thing for this, right? You've got a nice letter that you wrote on company letterhead. It is handwritten or at least hand signed, and maybe a little personalized note, and then just text. And you're going to do the same thing. You fold it up, you put it in a nice envelope, use the wax seal, right? Just make it really nice, right? And then you're going to include I would advise you, if this is really going to be something you do, develop a booklet for this, right? Have that booklet printed out, all the advantages of off market, all the stuff we've talked about, why they'd want to do it, what the advantages are, the price, we'll talk about the price on this. Usually off markets go for higher price than it would be for listed. All of your exposure, how you're going to market this, all that stuff, right? And make that into a booklet. And you're going to hand deliver that, right? When I say hand deliver, you're literally going to drop it off, right? Knock on the door, have a discussion, right? If they're not there, put it on the step, right? Or you're gonna spend the money. Again, this is for a prospect that is pretty well qualified in terms of making this decision. And you're gonna overnight them or UPS them a package, and it's going to be in one of those nice velvet boxes that we talked about, right? That has this, it's just a really nice thing. So they open it up, your personalized letters there, your booklets there, your cards there. We talked about doing the white label books, right? So there are white label books for off-market properties, or maybe you take one of those. There's literally one of them, I think, is how I'll sell your property, right? And you take that off-market book and you do a cover that says off-market listings or whatever your bold sort of cover is. And then you can go in and modify that online, what it looks like, and get 20 of those printed out, right? And you're going to include that in your thing that you physically give them, right? All of that stuff, because people will open that, they'll look at it, right? If somebody drops off a nice package, I'm going to open it up. I probably will toss the postcard. I'm going to look at it for 3 to 5 seconds and then toss it. But if somebody sends me something in a nice box, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to spend the time to actually look through it. And chances are, if you do all that, they're going to be impressed, right? Maybe they don't want to sell. Maybe they won't call you. Maybe they won't do anything with it, but they'll be impressed, right? And that's just another touch point, right? So when you go back, because after you do that, you're going to follow up, obviously. Hopefully by now you'll have their phone number, their email. Again, you mine that based on the address or the LLC. You're going to follow up about how that was. You're going to knock on the door, right? Until they say no, until they say beat it, basically. You're going to continue to follow this process. If you keep doing that, you'll develop a relationship, right? And even if they say no, right, I would still, obviously, your message changes. You're no longer doing a sell, but you're keeping them in your CRM and you're developing a different campaign for them that is more value based. So you're going to send them then, your newsletters about property values, what's new in Sarasota, your restaurant reviews, all your stuff, all that stuff that again, this is a luxury client. So you're positioning yourself and all your marketing and your branding to answer their needs, right? So you're going to put them in a campaign that is just providing value. You're staying top of mind because maybe they'll change their mind. And then if they do, you want to be top of mind so that you're the one that they choose. Again, you're positioning yourself a second block there. You're an advisor. You're a problem solver. You're not a salesperson. If you do all that and you have that high touch asset that you've delivered, at that point, they don't care if they don't recognize your name. They're going to recognize your company if you're with EXP. But if they've never heard of you, it doesn't matter because then you've demonstrated, right? You don't need the brand, the name behind the brand. Your brand is, if I'm working this hard to get your business, just imagine how hard I'm going to work for you if I'm actually trying to sell your property, right? That's what you're demonstrating to them at the end of the day. Okay, so two things, and the last thing. So, basically, how do you develop clients with this besides targeting, the avatar and the properties? You can connect with just people in your professional network or grow your professional network. And this is really more about growing your luxury sphere, right? People that work in adjacent industries, right? So CPAs, wealth advisors, private clubs, right? Luxury goods, that's a good one too. Although luxury goods are less important, but high dollar vehicles, things like that. Family office managers, right? So those are small funds, basically. Um, Okay, so excuse me. All right, so these are stats. These are taken from I think Coldwell Banker actually. don't judge me, but there is an advantage to doing this. So you'll typically get a much higher sales price um, when you're able to sell a property that is not in the MLS than what it would be priced at as in the MLS. And so why is that? That seems counterintuitive, right? It's because it's exclusive, right? And the fact that it's exclusive, there's already an understanding that price is going to be less negotiable. It is negotiable, obviously, but when you create exclusivity around a listing, even if it is publicly listed, if there's exclusivity, and that can be in terms of features of the property, or in this case, the audience that knows about it. When you create that, you're able to demand a higher price, right? And you'll use these statistics. This is part of your pitch, right? You're going to say you want $10 million for your property. Be honest, or maybe I wouldn't say not to be honest, but maybe you don't share, everything with that prospect. If that is, let's say the true value in your mind is about 8 million. If they list it off market and want 10 million for it, they have a higher chance of getting that number off market than they would if they listed it on market for 10 million, right? Because once it's in the public, the market takes over, right? They can compare price per square foot very easily. Um, you know, then you're, instead of the spotlight being on you, you're on the stage, right? You're on the beauty pageant. There's 20 other contestants, right? But when you're the only one on there, right? Everything, it's perfect, right? That's a weird analogy, sorry, but so you're creating that exclusivity. When you're able to do transactions like this that are off market, and I have, it is a smooth process, and that seller, you have created a fan for life, right? You came in, you said, hey, let's do this off market, let me try and find you a buyer. You find them a buyer, right? And by finding a buyer, they can or cannot have may or may not have an agent, right? Maybe it's another agent within your brokerage, or maybe word got out, right? That happens. You're not marketing the property outside of your brokerage, but somebody else is, or maybe a consumer talked to somebody, right? And they may show up with an agent. That's fine too. At the end of the day, you got to sell a property, right? Um, but client satisfaction is through the roof, right? You've done this off market. You said what you're going to do. You gave them the privacy they wanted, the exclusivity they wanted on both parties, really. And you've gained a client for life, right? So referrals, your sphere, your neighbors, all that stuff. It is a great story, right? And once you sell something off market, then you can make it as public as you want, right? Obviously, if the parties involved don't want to be named, then you have to respect that. But you're able to go to the neighbor and say, hey, I got Tom as 10 million bucks. We did it all off market. You go on Zillow, there's not a single picture of that house in the public realm right now. Like that's a success story, and that you can leverage and drive to gain additional clients. And then there's the high referral rate as well. Again, these are all statistics. I should have documented where that came from, but I think it was Coldwell Banker's site. Okay, so how do we stay ethical? Well, I guess ethics is not the right word for this, right? So I'm gonna get myself in trouble with with NAR and Realtor Board. Ethics is subjective, but when someone is telling you what is ethical and it has to do with business related decisions rather than true morality, which in my opinion, some of the current rules are based on business decisions and not morality. I don't like to use the word ethical, so I'm sorry I included that in there. So if you want to look at well, let's talk about that. Sorry, I got off topic here. This is in terms of your client, right? So obviously you're gonna respect their privacy, right? That's one of their drivers. That's one of the main features of this avatar is they want privacy. So always respect that, like over the top, right? And it comes first. And your discussions and everything in this relationship is going to be built on that requirement, right? So offer to do an NDA, right? No one in real estate does that. If I've got a showing, hey, I got somebody that wants to come in and see the property, do an NDA, right? And if you don't know how to do an NDA, have an attorney draft this for you or go on ChatGPT. I'm not going to talk about how to do that and what the ethics are of doing that. Um, but if I've got somebody that comes in and the buyer wants to see the property and they're not going to disclose, anything about your security and your artwork, and the price and your terms or who they are or who the buyer is, who the seller is, right? You're protecting that confidentiality. But again, you're showing that you're doing something that no one else is doing, and you're solving their problem. You're positioning yourself for their needs specifically, and that is a win-win, right? Um, and then just be very selective, right? All the buyers that come in have to be pre-vetted. And if you bring a buyer, if you're an agent working with a buyer and you want to go see a $5 to $10 million home, um, if I know the agent, that's the listing agent. We're talking on market things, right? If I want to go see a $10 million house with a client and I know the listing agent, chances are they're not going to ask me for proof of funds or pre-qual. They may ask about the buyer, but really it's to position themselves to sell the property during the showing. But if it's a random agent that approaches me to see a house, I'm going to ask everything about the buyer, who they are, where they come from. I probably still won't. I'll Google that, and if it looks like things line up, but if it doesn't, then I'm going to ask for proof of funds before I show the property. So you just need to be very selective with that. And again, that kind of goes back to the confidentiality and the privacy. But you need to the worst thing would be to have an off-market thing and you're developing the relationship and you bring in a buyer, and they show up obviously unqualified or asking questions that somebody in the $5 to $10 million range would just never ask, right? I know I'm generalizing and that sounds terrible, but you have to respect that client, the seller or the potential seller, and don't show their house to BS people. Be very transparent about your marketing methods, right? I'm just in general a big fan of honesty and over communication, and communicating things that are out of your best interest, right? If it's in the best interest of your client to say X, but it's in your best interest to say Y, always say X, right? Now you can say, hey, most agents would tell you Y, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you X, right? I'm sorry if I'm confusing with my analogy. And that's the approach I take. I always kind of remind them, like, not remind them, but say, hey, it's really not my best interest to tell you this, but you probably shouldn't accept this offer because blah, 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 right? Always develop that relationship, right? Okay, so let's talk about NARs real quick, or NAR, because I don't know that I have a slide on this. I don't. So right now, NAR, the clear cooperation rule, I would advise you guys just Google that. You'll see all the stuff that's in the press right now. But as we said, if once something goes outside of your brokerage, it has to go into the MLS within 24 hours. At least that's how it is in Florida. Some states will do it differently. The timeline and notification and what you can actually do off market and on market. So part of the problem is there has to be a national standard, in my opinion. But I will say check into this because everybody has haters, right? And the more successful you are, the more haters you will have. So if you're doing something, if you do an email blast out to all agents about an off-market property, somebody's going to report you, guaranteed. And we see this a lot, actually. It still boggles my mind when somebody would do this, right? An off-market thing. Hey, I've got an off-market property. Now you can say I have an off-market, come talk to me, right? That there you're not necessarily showing what the property is. But when you do a thing and you actually show a picture of the property and you say, hey, this is off market, like that is not allowed, right? And somebody will report you, right? But again, whether that's ethical or not, I'm not going to get into that because in my opinion, if a seller wants to sell a property, as long as you're not steering, people to that based on a protected class, right? Because that's not cool. But if somebody wants to keep something off market, I'll sell it to anybody that's got a check for 10 million bucks. They should be able to do that. That's just my opinion. And then you as an agent, as a broker, should be allowed to broker that deal, right? There shouldn't be this artificial thing where you have to do this in 24 hours and this, and because all you're really doing is feeding the system to allow somebody to eventually sell access to the property, right? It's a big business. Okay, follow-up system. So again, follow-up with this is key. You're going to develop this relationship over time. You may get a soft yes, or maybe they don't even say yes, but hey, I consider it. What price are you thinking of? Sure. If somebody, what you often get is, yeah, if you find somebody who wants to buy my place for 12 million bucks, come talk to me, right? That may be the message you get, right? So following up with that, developing that person, again, you're a problem solver. Developing that is key, right? So you're going to share market updates, anything you can do to provide value, right? They're a wealthy person. So you're going to provide value and all the stuff that we talked about in the power positioning stuff. So things about their lifestyle, all the drivers for them, right? Not the drivers for why they would sell this specific house, but the drivers for a wealthy person in your market, right? And if you've done that power positioning stuff well, you'll know what those are, right? Economic freedom, time with family, schooling for their children, access to transportation, all those drivers that we talked about for luxury clients that are different than, I'll say your average client, let's say a $500,000 buyer. They think differently and they have different things that impact their decisions, right? So you're going to cater to those decisions. Again, that's all the power positioning stuff. So you're going to send them that content, right? Whether it's a newsletter, whether it's in your emails, whatever. I would say you do everything. And mailings, you're going to keep constant contact, right? You're providing value, right? Soft check-ins. If someone had that conversation with you and they said, yeah, if you find somebody that wants to pay me $12 million for this property, let's have a discussion, right? Soft check-ins. Now, not weekly, right? Or based on your judgment of that discussion, you need to determine the right frequency, but have check-ins. Hey, John, we met before, chances, hopefully they'll know you by now because you've sent them a few things and emails and you provided value. But continually check in, right? Over time, you know, that for one, you're going to keep them ready for when, hey, John, I actually have somebody. Can we come see the place on Saturday? Right. But at some point, after all of this check-in, again, they may migrate to a traditional listing and they say, you know what, we've had this discussion. I think we actually do want to sell this. Why don't you come over and tell us, blah, 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 blah. Right. So continually follow up and check in. Again, you're building relationships. This is another thing. So invite them to eat events, right? So if you're doing one of these open houses or a broker's open, I talked about the hybrid event for this property. You're probably not going to do well. Sorry, not for this property specifically, but for a $5 to $10 million house, you're not necessarily going to do a traditional open house where any Joe Public person can come in and look at it. You might, and I'm doing some of those right now, actually. You're going to do hybrid events where you're inviting obviously all the agents and brokers you can get there for visibility, but you're also going to invite VIP clients. This is one of your VIP clients, right? So you're going to invite them to things like that. Here at our office, we do monthly networking events, right? Whether it's a social, kind of a happy hour or literally a networking thing, you're going to invite them to that, right? So all of these sort of events, you're going to invite them to, or maybe you just hold a dinner party, right? And this is over time, if you develop this relationship, maybe host a dinner party at their house, right? I know that sounds strange, but if you're like, hey, John, if you develop this relationship, hey, John, would you allow me to host a dinner party at your house, right? I'm going to pay for the food, the booze, you get to invite your neighbors, blah, blah, blah. Like that stuff actually works. If you develop this relationship, they'd be open to that, right? And again, the intent of that is you're going to invite the neighbors, their friends, their sphere, because that is an invitation into their sphere at that point, right? That's going to be a soft sell. They're not going to know that they're at an event, the attendees, but you're going to be there, right? And you're not going to be over the top about why. Yeah, I paid $40 for this bottle of wine. Like that's not it, right? You're attending from their eyes, and you're a soft sell, but you're positioning yourself as, oh yeah, I'm John. I'm John's real estate agent, but I'm really a problem solver, right? And then that leads to the discussions. So the intent is, again, you're trying to inject yourself in that person's life as much as you can, right? But this is long term. This is baby steps. Now, don't, a week after a week after that initial, yeah, if you bring in the right client for 12 million, you're not going to say, all right, well, let me hold a dinner party at your house, right? Because they're going to think you're crazy and shut you down completely, right? And maybe that's not the right thing to do. You need to develop that relationship to a point where you can suggest something big like that. Um, but once they're in your ecosystem, this is considered a VIP client, and you're going to invite them to things. And you'll be surprised, actually, the things that they show up to, especially if there's perceived value. Maybe you're doing an event where they're going to talk about cryptocurrency, or there's a family a fund, right? There's a new investment opportunity. Again, you're not pitching your stuff, you're pitching somebody else's stuff, right? And it all has to be legitimate, of course, but you're going to take them to that, right? It doesn't have to be your thing. You're just going to accompany them, right? Or maybe there is like a luxury brokers event where they can go to another brokerage's or another agent's open house. That's a really cool $18 million property that the public does not have access to, but they're doing a brokers event. Take them with you. Literally go pick them up or have them meet you there. Say, hey, John, there's this VIP event at a house kind of like yours. Let's go to it, right? Again, they're getting access to something that the public doesn't have access to. So you're catering to that exclusivity vibe, and you're developing the relationship. So, okay, the power referral, right? So I'll wrap this up quickly, I promise. Again, these people own lots of properties in various markets, right? So even if it's not in your local market, right? Let's say they have a house in Toronto, or maybe it's, they have a ski house and a beach house and some other stuff, right? And you learn through the course of this, like, yeah, I don't want to sell this because I want to hold on to this one. We're going to sell our ski house in January, right? Okay, I'm not going to sell that house, but I'm going to build a relationship and say, I have a colleague in Vail, that does all this business, and then you're going to go into your referral bin, right? Again, if you work for a big company like EXP, there are luxury agents in Vail that you can say, refer that off to, right? And then you're making 25% of that deal as well, right? And then same thing, eventually you're going to get into their friends and family network. Wealthy clients stick together, right? Whether it's here or maybe you're going to get introduced to somebody that's off market somewhere. Again, that's the visibility you need to have, right? Your sphere grows in these concentric rings, the stronger your relationship is in the center. Okay, so, and again, referrals are big. If you're not in the referral game, two ways that's a separate class, but you should be reaching out to agents in these feeder markets and just letting them know who you are, sending them information about the area, so that when they have a client, again, research who the top referral markets are right now, and then you're developing relationships with 10, 20 agents in that market, because they may have someone that wants to move here from Chicago, and they're going to come to you first. And there's a whole strategy on how you do that, what you're sending, and maybe you're offering them a 30% or 40% referral, right? Instead of the normal 25, right? I guarantee if you call 100 agents and offer them a 40% referral, when they have a client that's going to move down to this area, and maybe it's not even here, you just say Florida, right? Jill's my person. Oh, I'm going to get 40% off that. I'm calling Jill, right? That's how you develop that sort of thing. Yeah, I don't want to go off into a tangent too much. Okay, so again, this is an EXP pitch. Sorry. If you don't work for EXP, if you're watching this recorded, take advantage of whatever your brokerage is, and maybe they offer different things. We have huge nationwide resources here, and then across the world, right? I think we're in 26 different countries or something like that. Use that to your advantage, right? In both your pitch and all of your written material, to go gain those potential clients. Right. Because let's be honest, I won't name them by name, but let's say there's a couple huge brokerages here locally in our market that have no one outside of the country, certainly, or even outside of this market. They can't make that same pitch. So while they may be very successful here, if you're trying to get an off-market person, they won't have the same success because they can't go out and reach those other feeder markets. Okay. We talked about all this. So you're positioning yourself. Having off-market stuff it's good in general. because you always have something, a pocket listing to point to when you need it, but you're developing that sphere and that you're just expanding your client base. You're going to establish yourself as exclusive. Like right now, I know I won't mention him by name, but if I ever want anything on Longboat Key and it's not an MLS, I know exactly who to call. Right? There's literally one person I can call, and they probably have 5, 10 off market stuff. Right? You want to become that person, because that person never markets those properties. But I know if I need something, I go to that person, and they've got at least 5, 10 things that I can choose from. So become that person in your market. Okay. That's it, guys. So that was, again, this is high level, and you could really dig in deep about how you connect with these people and then what the actual pitch is. And if you want to do that, just schedule a private call with me. I'll be more than happy to do that. Be more than happy to go out there with you on meetings and put stuff together. But I would highly advise you go after this opportunity, right? If you see, especially, expired, right? If you see a luxury listing that expired a year ago, 2 years ago, even 5 years ago, but never sold, um, chances are they would sell that house for the right price, right? So have that discussion with them. Get them as a pocket listing. You don't even need to be exclusive. They can be working with 2 other agents. They probably aren't because not many people are doing this, but get them in your network, right? And then develop the relationship. Maybe that eventually proves into a traditional listing. And then if it doesn't, obviously you've got a new client that can refer you, or might buy something new or might sell something different in a different market. So that's all I have. Do you guys have any questions? If you do, come off mute. I can't read notes right now.
I do have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Let me find them. So they do sign an NDA. That's what you do to protect yourself, or they don't? Like if you have an off-market VIP client that has decided to allow you to market off-market, exclusive VIP, all the things,
Yep.
do they sign any papers?
No. So if they want to do an NDA with either you or a buyer that comes into the property, you should offer that, right? If that is a driver for them. But otherwise, no, this is all informal. So there is not an exclusive agreement. There's nothing. This is an old-fashioned, hey, we're going to market this property now. Now, would I do a commission agreement? I would probably do a commission agreement before I showed it. And if I'm a buyer's agent and I'm going into an off-market listing, I'm going to do that ahead of time. I'm going to send so there's got to be a payment agreed between agents before they show a property, in my opinion. But no, there's no listing agreement.
Okay.
There's nothing like that.
My questions I wrote down. Okay, so there's nothing in writing, right? And then, would you be sharing on your social media or no? Because it's an off market.
Yeah, you can't. You got to be
Oh,
really
oh,
discreet about
good.
this. Yeah, because the NAR will come after you. So,
Oh, okay.
now,
Yeah.
listen, you can be cheeky, and there's ways you can let people know that you have off-market listings.
Oh, that's it.
But yeah, you can't be specific about a property. The rule is once if somebody can figure out what the property is, in the public realm from your messaging, then they consider that marketing, right? So, and there's different, well, can you say the street? Can you just say, I've got off-market listings on Longboat Key, right? I don't know. Actually, there's probably some discretion there and some gray area. But if somebody can certainly figure out what the specific property is from anything that you do, then you cannot do that.
Okay. And the last question I think is, you personally have done this
Yeah. Yep.
and
It's very powerful at the luxury level because people, and I've sold off-market properties too, right? So not even just to try and develop my sphere. And once you gain success in this and people know that you kind of deal in off-market stuff, you'll develop a reputation among agents fairly quickly because there's not a lot of agents that have off-market listings. And they'll start to come to you actually, or you'll be able to respond because you'll see this a lot. At least I do. People will say, "Hey, I've got a buyer that's looking for a property on Longboat Key that meets this, this, and this, right? What they're really trying to do when they say that is they're trying to reach agents that have off-market properties.
Yeah, I'm sure you get messages. I always get texts like they're looking for off market, which is, investors, and they're interesting. They like one off market, but yet there's a million homes sitting for sale that are desperate. Anyway, one other question that I wrote down here is, have you ever had a seller? I mean, I had a seller years ago and it wasn't even a expensive home that did not want photos because of their fear of um people seeing their stuff and everything. Is that anything that you've seen or heard of?
Well, I've not the entire house. I've seen people that have artwork and things like that that don't want you to have take photos of that.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. Because I
yeah,
was
if you're going to market it on the MLS and they won't let you take any interior photos, it's just you can do that, obviously. I mean, but it's a hard
yeah,
sell. You'll have to put that in the listing description, right? Figure
right.
out how to weave that in there, right? For privacy concerns, contact the agent directly. But again, as soon as you talk about any sort of contact or agent sort of thing, MLS doesn't like that. So it's just a hard sell.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I like the approach. I think it's like you said, the goal is to have the rapport and to develop the relationship, maybe perhaps get the listing down the road or sell it as an off market. I mean, there's multiple benefits, I guess.
Yeah.
And
And
just
it's an
being your
easier sell
energy.
than doing a lot of people do expireds, right? And that's a hard sell sometimes. So when it's an off market and instead of pitching them directly to get their expired listing as a new listing, so if that's not your approach, but your approach is I don't want to list it. I want to list it off market and we'll get you the price that you want. And I'm not going to waste your time if they don't meet your price. That's a different conversation and one that somebody who had an expired listing is more than likely more willing to listen to, especially in the luxury side. Now, not all of this has the same success rate. If you're going after a 300,000, 400,000, whatever
Yeah,
house, it's a different client and they're getting bombarded with expired stuff all the
yeah,
time, right? So.
right, right. And then how do you access like the key and all that? Or maybe they're like in New York and the property's here and they only visit for 2 weeks a year or whatever, and they've kind of agreed, yeah, okay, sure, I'm open to selling it at, 7 million or whatever it is. Like, how do you arrange like
Just
access?
access in general.
Yeah,
Yeah,
without
a lot. So most people they're going to have services that come in and check on their house on a
right,
regular basis, right? They'll have a manager that comes in and does that. So usually it'll be accessed through that, or you can arrange. People, a lot of people at this price range have electronic things on their house to give you access
right.
to. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Okay. And cameras and all the things. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. No, this was great. Thank you so much.
cool. You're welcome. Anyone else any questions?
Yeah, hey Mark, I do. I
Hey,
have two questions. Hey, okay, so the first thing is I've always like kind of like shied away from people who like who don't are vacant homes. So are you saying that for this going for like, homes that are vacant are like the best way to go or what?
yeah, well, whenever there's less of an emotional attachment to it, right? So,
Okay.
if a house is vacant, do you mean like vacant, like no furniture, no anything?
Like the person, has either a little bit of furniture or no furniture at all. Like they've moved on to like another like home. They're in, like you said, they're in another state.
Yeah,
They're just trying to get this home sold, but they've moved. Like they want to get it sold type of deal.
right. But they don't want to list it. I guess I don't understand the client.
Yeah. So they're out of. I know you mentioned like absentee
Yeah,
owners. So in this scenario, you're saying to go after absentee owners.
yeah. But what I mean by that is, they own the house and it's beautiful, it's fully furnished, ready to go. They just don't
I
spend a
got
lot of time there, right? Because
Okay. Okay.
because their life just doesn't allow for it, or they own four other homes, so they're here
Okay.
once or twice a week. Whenever there's less of an emotional attachment to the
Okay.
house, the more willing they are to say yes to something like this, I guess is the point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And the other question is, so door knocking, I I'm telling you right now, like that's one thing I do not do. That's just the fear that I have of doing
Yeah,
door
me
knocking.
either. That's fine. Yeah.
But I do a lot of open houses here in Apollo Beach, and in Ruskin for an agent that has a lot of like $1 million homes, like luxury listings. So how would this work or play when I'm hosting an open house and I have someone that is looking to potentially, let's say, buy, and they have a house where they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to sell it type of deal. So how would this work for me when I'm in these open houses, like doing luxury open houses?
Yeah, it's the same thing, right? So if they don't want to sell it, um, well, I would try and find out why, right? But maybe they would be willing to sell it if they didn't have to list it publicly, right? So maybe the question is, well, I can list it for you off market, and we can try and get you a price. Would you be open to that? And then explain why that might be important to them, right? You're not going in the MLS. There's less of
Okay.
you get to pick and choose when you show the house and who the clients are. And, there's less of that, like, I might call you at any time. You got to be out of there in 4 hours sort of thing, right? It truly is because when you're working with somebody that's looking at an off-market property to buy,
Mhm.
um,
Right,
it's usually not a last minute thing, right? Schedules are known well in advance, right? So you have an opportunity to schedule things in advance. They're probably going to get a higher price, or there's just a lot of advantages for someone in that situation. So I would say that, and like if I'm looking for houses, but I'm not ready to sell. If they're truly just not ready, then maybe that's a different avatar, right? But if it's like I don't want to list my house for whatever the reason is, then I think I would have that discussion and just bring it up. There's no harm that can come from this, right? It's to me, it's just
right,
another tool.
right,
Um, Even when you're on a regular listing or talking to prospect about listing their home, um, if there's hesitation, maybe you offer to list it off market, right? And again, the intent is you're keeping them warm for when they do want to list it, right? Yeah, of course you're going to try and sell it off market,
right.
but you even though it's not exclusive and you have nothing in writing,
Mhm.
you've got a prospect that you have more of a formal relationship with, so that maybe when they do change their mind and they want to list it, you're their agent, right? It's kind of built into it. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it was just I just wanted to kind of see how I would approach that
Yeah,
when
use it.
doing
Use it as a tool, right? Start using this as another way to reach people. And if you get a hard no on the listing, maybe this is, follow up right behind it. Well, kind of keep this as a pocket listing, right?
right.
And people are more willing to say yes to that because there's really no downside to them.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. Awesome. Thank
Yes,
you.
Linda.
One last question. If I'm sitting with an agent friend with another brokerage, I'm allowed to share an address, right, of the VIP, this private off market, even though I have nothing in writing, I can share. I'm just asking.
I'm not going to answer that question.
See, that's where I'm all about rules because I
Yeah.
don't want to violate anything.
Yeah.
So that's
The
the,
last thing I want you to do is violate anything. So I would
right,
just
right.
encourage you to find out specifically what the rules are for that
Okay. And
scenario
then
and then do it.
ultimately they have to have like a legit before I would share because this is like for me to us to sell personally, not another realtor, correct? Is that
Right.
kind of the idea? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So before I would even consider having that discussion, I would find out who their, maybe not who their buyer is, but just make sure they're qualified for sure.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. Got you.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to be squirrely with that, but
That's okay. You
I've got
guys,
I've got haters too. So if I say the wrong thing,
yeah,
we'll
right, right. I mean, this is really just it's an avenue to generate possibilities. Like it's really like you said, it's a long game. It's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
it's a way if somebody says no, like just for Tasha's example, if somebody says no, would you consider doing something off market, having this as a pocket listing, right? And it allows you, instead
It's
of full
creative.
stop, go on to the next person, it allows you to put them in a warming pool and still have that relationship.
Right. They're going to be like, what? I don't have to list it. It's like it's a creative possibility that you're creating to potentially make hundreds of
Yeah,
thousands of
you're
dollars.
you're a problem solver. Yeah, absolutely.
Problem solver.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like that.
yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, so you need to position that as like a win-win, right? There's no downside for them in doing that, literally, right? So,
Yeah, I actually know someone that's not in the luxury that's in Arlington Park that I met with that is won't list it, but says bring me a buyer. So it's very interesting,
yeah.
but their house needs a lot of work. I mean, it's either tear down or, it's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah. So we
It's
didn't get
not
into
always.
that, but sometimes
Yeah.
when things, when things expire and they don't get relisted, it's because the house is just terrible, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a clear-cut rule, certainly. So,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. This
yep,
was
of course. All right, guys, I'm gonna wrap this up then. Thank you for your time. Everyone have a great weekend. This will be recorded and stuck on YouTube as usual. And then we'll see you. I believe Matt's doing on Tuesday a mastermind class. Matt, if I'm wrong, I apologize. Otherwise, we'll see you next Friday for the another master class, and the subject is to be determined. All right, guys, thank you. Have a great weekend.